The Boy in His Mountains, Nietzsche. The boy. Real quick quote just to start this off would be, philosophy, so far as I have understood it and lived so far, is living freely in ice and high mountains. I mean, it's just straight up with Zarathustra. We know he was influenced by mountains. He lived in the mountains. He walked in the mountains. He'd spend good stretches out there writing, walking, aphorisms. We know this. But this is what, there's influence in there, questions of where he was up in the mountains, what he would do in the mountains, how he would live up there, what influence it had on his books, as well as the influence it had on the relationships that he had throughout his life, especially in the later years from 79 onwards when he started living this way predominantly after he left Basel. But where at? Boy is not always this way. I just said like 79 to left Basel. He no longer worked at school there. He would get sick too often. Basically, his long holidays were just limiting him to where he couldn't work anymore. So he went out, spent a lot of times out in Sils Maria, Switzerland. Not the only place he would stay, but he would spend predominantly a lot amount of time here. Especially there's the Nietzsche house there, as you see on the left. He would rent a room up there in the top with the same people every year. Usually spend 3-4 months out there writing. He was a very routine guy as well. Wake up, eat basically the same thing, walk, write, come back in the evening, work on his medical condition, help himself with that, and then move on from there. Eventually writing whole books. He spent a lot of time writing and letters to other people as well. So as much as he was in isolation up there, he did spend all right doing that. I think it is important to note that he wasn't always this independent. A lot of his earlier works aren't so focused on the individualization of things. But as he started going into this method of writing and this kind of style where he would be out by himself in complete solitude with the nature and the mountains, our guy would get more individualistic. But why? Why, boy? There's 4 main reasons. As the thought was in the earlier quote, as well as this one here, is never trust a thought that occurs to you indoors. This helped his thinking. Didn't want to sit in a desk. He didn't want to sit down and write. The best thoughts were outside where you can let that mind go. His health was also pretty detrimental to him, where these climates would be better acclimate to his health and better him. So that's why he moved around. He didn't really stay in one spot too long. He did like the cold as well too. It helped with his health, but it also maybe permeates through his writing too. This cold kind of writing, kind of abrasive, but he loved walking too. He would write letters to people, especially in the early time when he first started going out here, when he first started writing Thus Post Zarathustra. He would claim that he needs to get his 8 to 10 hours of walking. Could easily walk 6 hours a day. It was like a medicine for him, was just walking, going out in nature, feeling the air, getting his thoughts together. So especially after he left Basel, he didn't spend a lot of time in cities. They didn't accumulate these kind of things that he wanted, these values that he had. The mountain thoughts though, so what was he thinking out here? I think clearly Thus Spoke Zarathustra is the most clear example of this, as Zarathustra starts on top of a mountain in a cave, comes down and descends down from it, ascends up to it. These kind of thoughts going up and down, it kind of gives the hierarchical stature of his moral philosophy as well, the slave and the master morality. You get these highs and lows. But it's interesting that he doesn't ever really talk about summits. In the literature that I had read on this, they pointed out that there's never really a mention of summits, except for when he's talking about really closed systems, like a pyramid kind of closed system. He more talks about it as progress, and there's peaks and valleys. So it's this upward, up and down kind of fluid momentum through life. Through his metaphors, it's up and down kind of things. Because summits kind of represent kind of a god figure, like Mount Olympus with the Greek gods sitting up on top of their peaks. We're not gods. God doesn't exist. The summit isn't the end goal. You reach summits, you reach peaks, but you go down and you come back up. through the trials and tribulations, through human nature, as well as nature and the animalistic metaphors. He uses the lion, the camel, and the child in their Zarathustra, the blonde beast. He talks a lot about this natural aspect of things, these individual natural instincts as us as human beings, and what we have to deal with, we have to go through, and dealing with that, accepting that, and not even accepting it, but embracing it, embracing that will to power, moving forward with how we work throughout that world. But the mountain strikes back. Didn't always help him. Helped his thoughts, that's for sure, but there are consequences. No money, no job. His work wasn't initially received, and isolation is a double-edged sword. To sum all those points up, the double-edged sword would be it helped his thoughts. And like I said before, and what his quotes are saying, like, it gave him this clarity that he could think higher, he could think clear. He could kind of separate that ill health and have a clear mind at least. His body was going against him, but at least his mind could continue to work towards writing what he wanted to write, writing these books he wanted to. But his work was not always well initially received. So it's interesting how he was able to live this lifestyle when he wasn't really selling much. He had to write a lot of his own stuff, publish a lot of his own stuff, make copies himself, send it out to people. Which is ironic because he claimed he wrote to be misunderstood. So it's kind of odd to then write, be not well received, and then live out in the mountains. It's a tough life. He had a lot of help from his mother. His mother would send him food, other things like that, especially since the trip up to the Sos Maria was, I think it was today, 6 hours to get up there from the nearest main town. So 1800s, probably take more than 6 hours to get there. Yeah, he had no job, no money, so he had to have help from his mother. He had to publish all these things himself. So, and the isolation aspect of it too possibly helped with him eventually losing his mind. This clarity he got, but then also the eventual downfall of this clarity, of this isolation, of this individualism, could have definitely struck back on him. Big oof here though, his relationships. To start off, he wrote a lot of letters. At least bullet points are upside down, but he wrote a lot of letters and to try to keep in touch with people. But it wasn't ever really like thoroughly keeping in touch. I mean, to add on to that, the receptacle point I have here, like Wagner, there's a quote talking about Wagner and relating him to Nietzsche. Wagner was very much like a receptacle with his friends. He'd plug himself into them to get like confirmation back to him. He'd explain his ideas just so he can get reaffirmation that he's going down the right path or he's not going down the right path. He wouldn't necessarily be a friend in that regard. It wasn't like a give mutual thing happening. It was more of a one-sided kind of thing. So these written letters were kind of in the same way where maybe people wouldn't respond to him that much. Just his general friendship wouldn't happen that much. He even said with his sister's wedding, he responded to her in a letter saying that I wouldn't be worthy. I'm a sick philosopher, quoted sick, a sick man. I wouldn't be able to be comfortable giving you away because obviously their father had died. So he would be the one giving her away at her wedding, but he didn't feel comfortable with that. I mean, we could also misconstrue that and tie that in with his relationship with his sister's fiance. I think just from an individual aspect, it's important to note that he himself thought of him that way. And his friendship with Erwin Rohde, who he was friends with at Basel, known him for a very long time. They actually got along very well. They had kind of the same ideas. They worked well with each other for pretty much a decade. But after that, after a long time being in isolation, next time he saw him, he's kind of like, I don't know this guy anymore. He's changed. He's a different man. He doesn't really know what he's looking at anymore. He's very kind of mad in a way. To pull a quote from what he was saying, from what Erwin would say to him is, I wish you could see into my heart and know how grateful I am. All you have given me. You opened to me the blessed land of purest friendship. That's how it started. But by 1880, when he was leaving to go into his isolationism, he couldn't quite understand where he was going and where his philosophy was going. And then by 86, he's quoted saying that they were virtual strangers to each other. He even went further, saying after he read Beyond Good and Evil, he exclaimed that Nietzsche needed to get a better job. Erwin had lived his life. He had moved on. He had gone and done the things he wanted to, job. Well, I said things he wanted to, probably the one things he wanted to, but the normal social norm thing to do, job, married, kids. Nietzsche didn't do that. So there's separation there. So despite all the good things that came out of it and how he was able to write so much, he was able to get so much out, he was able to fully delve himself into his philosophy. He, by the end of it, probably got screwed in the way. But he kind of lived with his philosophy, though. As this quote in the middle here, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely, often, and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. So he owned himself. He paid that price, but he also paid a heavier price in the latter end, possibly became even more part of the tribe. And then we just have a funny meta meme on the side here. But thank you. Hopefully that gave some insight into some further development into especially Nietzsche's later works and why they are the way they are.